Hello humans and household pets, Henry Audubon here. Thanks a lot for tuning in to Game Design Rules. I'd like to talk today about separation. It's a concept that is so deeply embedded in games that I think it's often overlooked. For the purpose of this video, I'd like to define separation as being the existence of distance between game elements within a game space. Another way to put this is that two game elements are separated if they are not at the same position within a game space. Now, to illustrate why this is so fundamental, I'd like to offer a thought experiment. Let's take the classic Super Mario Bros. And give it a twist, which is that when Mario starts a level, he begins at the flagpole. What would this game be like? Well, it would be completely trivial, right? If it could even be called a game at all. When you start a level, the flag would descend down the flagpole and the music would change and your score would appear on screen, but there would be no opportunity for interactivity, no opportunity for the player to offer inputs, and thus no opportunity for challenge. And in all likelihood, there wouldn't even be a level to the left of the flagpole because Nintendo wouldn't have a level designer populate a space with Koopas and Goombas and blocks and piranha plants if Mario never had a reason or even an opportunity to explore that space. So in this way, levels are dependent on there being initial separation between game elements. In this case, the player from the goal, Mario from the flagpole. Of course, Mario in reality starts at the far end of a level and has to traverse an interesting environment and a challenging environment in order to reach the goal. So this challenge is only possible because Mario starts out separated from the flagpole. Now, this isn't the only way in which separation manifests itself within games. One common trope that's found in games is a key and a lock. So to explore this a little bit, let's imagine that we have a door in our level, and the player can open the door and move through it freely. Currently, the door doesn't offer any challenge to the player, but if we did want the door to offer challenge, one way we might go about that is to introduce some separation by having the door be locked and then have the key be crucially at a different position on the level. Note that if the key were at the lock, then the situation would reduce to what we started with, was just a door with presenting no challenge. So once again, we see separation, distance between game elements within the game space, as being a kind of harbinger of challenge. Now, keys and locks is something that many people have seen, but I think that there is a lot of room to explore with separation, especially as it pertains to enemy design. I want to use for this an example from The Binding of Isaac. There's an enemy that is a mask and a heart. This is like an anatomical heart, right? And the idea here is that the mask will chase the player around the level, it will charge at you, and it will attack you. And ultimately, it's completely invulnerable to any kind of attack that you might try, whether that be tears or bombs or something else. The heart, on the other hand, is vulnerable to your attacks. And when the heart is destroyed, its corresponding mask is also destroyed. So the existence of the mask is dependent upon the existence of the heart. Now, when you think about enemies in general, enemies have multiple dimensions to them, right? They can move around, let's say. They can attack you, and they can be attacked. And in this example of the mask and the heart, we see that the enemy has kind of been carved at its joints, where there's been some separation introduced, where the part of the enemy that can be attacked is over here at one position in the heart, represented by the heart, and the enemy that does the attacking is the mask at a different position. And this creates an interesting enemy type. I mean, the fact that that the enemy is distributed across multiple positions and where each part of it has a different role to play makes for quite engaging enemy experience. Another enemy from the Binding of Isaac that's interesting and has some separation to it, at least as I see it, are these circular stone faces that will shoot projectiles at you out of their mouth. And the catch here is that they're completely invulnerable, but they're only awake when there are other enemies present in the room. So their awakeness is dependent upon there being other enemies. So in some way, there is some separation there, right? You can't deal with this enemy directly. You need to deal with it by taking care of enemies that are located at a different position than it. So there's a bit of separation there, a bit of distance introduced, and it creates an interesting challenge for the player, I think. One place where separation is commonly found, and this is related, of course, to enemy design, is in boss fights. Often bosses will have a weak spot that is different from the spot that they're attacking you from. So just to give an example off the top of my head, there might be a giant boss who has big arms and he's trying to crush you with his fists, and you cannot do any damage to the boss by hitting his arms. You need to hit him in the head, let's say. So here, the part of the enemy that does the attacking is separate from the part of the enemy that gets attacked, similar to what we saw with the mask and the heart. And this is interesting. Even though the distance isn't that great, there's not that much separation, the mere existence of some separation makes this encounter a lot more interesting. So this is why this kind of separation is so often introduced in boss fights. I mean, how often have you seen it where, you know, the enemy is attacking you from the front, but you need to hit it in the back, perhaps at a weak spot in its tail. It's very common, and it's just a little bit of separation, but it creates a lot more of an engaging and dynamic kind of encounter. All right, so one last example of separation, at least that I've observed in games recently, is in traps. Now, you know, if you've watched Indiana Jones, you've seen him step on a pressure plate and the dart shoots out of the wall. And this is very common in traps, right? Where you've got something that is going to be attacking you, and then at a different position, there's a trigger that will set off that trap. Now, of course, some traps don't have separation, really. For instance, if there was a pressure plate where you step on it and spikes emerge out of the ground right there and do some damage to you, that may or may not be an interesting trap, but there's no separation to be found, right? Everything is happening at the same position. But let's think about this idea of a dart trap shooting out of the wall with a pressure plate that activates it. Well, your first thought might be that, well, there really isn't much separation there either because you're getting attacked at the position of the pressure plate, so the spikes might as well be coming out of the ground there. But this isn't necessarily the case because you might be able to perhaps lure an enemy in front of the trap and then step on the pressure plate and have the enemy get hit by a dart. And in this way, the trap is made much more interesting than the spikes that just come out of the ground right where you are. In fact, this kind of creates the opportunity for a player to be creative and express themselves through gameplay, which is so important for a dynamic and engaging game. So anyways, I think that there's a lot of open space here to innovate and to explore separation in different aspects of game design. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. Game Design Rules.